Hi, my name is Jim and I work at the Saskatoon Public Library and I'm here to do an adult story time. So all you kids, you get out of here. Actually, I don't think this is not kid friendly. You might actually find it entertaining. Anyway, this is how it goes. I'm going to read a poem and then my colleagues are going to look at the video of me reading the poem and they're going to respond in kind. They're going to, whatever the poem evokes in them, they're going to respond with another poem perhaps, or a quote, or just a rant, who knows. We'll see what happens. Anyway, I want to acknowledge that I'm sitting, not standing, on Treaty 6 territory. And that it's also the homeland of the Métis. And that I'm proud to be doing this adult story time on that treaty land. On this treaty land, rather. So I have to start by telling you that when I was searching for a poem, I've been sitting on my back porch, reading aloud poems from all over the world and from different time periods, etc., etc., searching for just the right poem to read to you. And poetry is a very emotional thing. I like it, but I don't spend a lot of time with poetry most days. And when I do, well, that's probably the reason why I don't spend that much time. It's very emotional stuff. For example, I was reading If by Rudyard Kipling. You might be familiar with it, in which he says, if you can do this, and if you can do this, and if you can do this, and if you can do this. He gets to the end of it. He says, if you can do this, my son. I started to weep. You will become a man. And I just broke into tears. I was just weeping, just flowing out of me on my back porch. So much so, and so loudly, I guess, that my neighbor came across and said, are you all right? I heard you weeping. And I had to, well, I'm fine, thanks. I've just been reading poetry, which she completely understood because she happens to be a poet. Anyway, I decided instead of going the sort of dark, well, not necessarily dark, but serious route in the poetry, I would read you a humorous poem. Because, like Joni Mitchell says, laughing and crying, it's the same release, right? So let's do the laughing part today. The poem I'm going to read to you is called The Revenant. And if you don't know, revenant means ghost, really. And in this case, it's the ghost of a dog that comes back to talk, well, haunt really, his master. It was written by Billy Collins, who's a famous American United States poet, who is still alive. He's a contemporary poet. And if you want to hear him read, he's an excellent reader of his own poetry, I think, anyway. You can see him on, there's many YouTubes of him reading his poetry. Some TED Talks and things like that. He's a very funny guy. I highly recommend it. The Revenant. I am the dog you put to sleep, as you like to call the needle of oblivion. Come back to tell you this simple thing. I never liked you. When I licked your face, I thought of biting off your nose. When I watched you toweling yourself dry, I wanted to leap and unman you with a snap. I resented the way you moved, your lack of animal grace, the way you would sit in a chair to eat, a napkin in your lap, knife in your hand. I would have run away, but I was too weak. A trick you taught me while I was learning to sit and heel, and greatest of insults, shake hands without a hand. I admit the sight of the leash would excite me, but only because it meant I was about to smell things you had never touched. You do not want to believe this, but I have no reason to lie. I hated the car, the rubber toys, disliked your friends, and worse, your relatives. The jingling of my tags drove me mad. You always scratched me in the wrong place. All I ever wanted from you was food and fresh water in my metal bowls. While you slept, I watched you breathe as the moon rose in the sky. It took all my strength not to raise my head and howl. Now I am free of the collar, the yellow raincoat, monogram sweater, the absurdity of your lawn. And that is all you need to know about this place. Except what you already supposed and are glad it did not happen sooner, that everyone here can read and write, the dogs in poetry, the cats and all the others in prose.
Hi, my name's Mike. I just listened to Jim read The Revenant by Billy Collins, and I have some thoughts. Anthropomorphism. It's a big word, putting human characteristics onto something that isn't human, usually an animal, but often an inanimate object. Think the Beauty and the Beast movie with talking candlesticks and clocks and teapots. But in this case, I think Billy is tapping into a very ancient idea, a way of putting human actions onto something that isn't human so that we can talk about something that maybe is uncomfortable to talk about from a human perspective, but we're going to give you a little more latitude to discuss this uncomfortable thing because we're really talking about an animal here. I think in this case, Billy Collins does an interesting job of talking about the way we relate to our pets and how maybe they would think about us if we had the context for what they think is important, as opposed to our own selfish ideas of what we think are important. It reminded me of a Terry Pratchett book that I've just read for about the third or fourth time, called The Amazing Maurice. So I'm going to read you a little piece from the first chapter. Maybe you go ahead and read it yourself if you haven't afterwards, or maybe you've already read it and I give you a little impulse to reread. I think it's a very clever idea, and in this case we're going to move away from dogs and we're going to take the view of a cat. They said he was amazing. The amazing Maurice, they said. Well, he'd never meant to be amazing. It had just happened. He'd realized something was odd that day just after lunch, when he'd looked up into a reflection in a puddle and thought, "That's me." He'd never been aware of himself before. Of course, it was hard to remember how he'd thought before becoming amazing. It seemed to him that his mind had just been a kind of soup. And then there had been the rats who lived under the rubbish heap in one corner of his territory. He'd realized there was something educated about the rats when he jumped on one and it had said, "Can we talk about this?" And part of his amazing new brain had told him you couldn't eat someone who could talk. At least, not until you'd heard what it had got to say. That rat had been Peaches. She wasn't like other rats. Nor was Dangerous Beans, Donut Enter, Dark Tan, Ham and Pork, Big Savings, Toxie, and all the rest of them. But then, Maurice wasn't like other cats anymore. Other cats were suddenly stupid. Maurice started to hang around with the rats instead. They were someone to talk to. He got on fine so long as he remembered not to eat anyone they knew. The rats spent a lot of time worrying about why they were suddenly so clever. Maurice considered that this was a waste of time. Stuff happened. But the rats went on and on about whether it was something on the rubbish heap they'd eaten. And even Maurice could see that wouldn't explain how he'd got changed, because he'd never eaten rubbish, and certainly wouldn't eat any rubbish off that heap, seeing where it came from. He considered that the rats were quite frankly dumb. Clever, okay, but dumb. Maurice had lived on streets for 4 years, and barely had any ears left, and had scars all over his nose, and he was smart. He swaggered so much when he walked that if he didn't slow down, he flipped himself over. When he fluffed out his tail, people had to step around it. He reckoned you had to be smart to live for 4 years on these streets, especially with all the dog gangs and freelance furriers. One wrong move and you were lunch and a pair of gloves. Yes, you had to be smart. You also had to be rich. This took some explaining to the rats, but Maurice had roamed the city and learned how things worked, and money, he said, was the key to everything. And then one day he'd seen the stupid-looking kid playing the flute with his cap in front of him for pennies, and he'd had an idea. An amazing idea. It just turned up, bang, all at once. Rats, flute, stupid-looking kid. And he'd said, "Hey, stupid-looking kid, how would you like to make your fortune?" "Nah, kid, I'm down here." And that's a snippet from Terry Pratchett's The Amazing Maurice. I think a very similar, disdainful approach to humanity in the guise of looking through the eyes of another species. Can't wait to see what's next.
Okay, Jim. You can't do a poem about a dead dog without talking about the most famous dead dog in literature. You may be familiar with a book called The Odyssey, where, Odysseus goes on a long voyage, fights in a war, gets lost on his way home, and spends 20 years trying to get back to his kingdom. And when he does, the first person to see him is his dog, Argos. And he's lying in a dung heap. He's covered in fleas. Odysseus has approached the palace with Eumaeus, and he sees the dog and he recognizes the dog, and he's like, "I raised that dog from a pup before I left, and here he is again waiting for me." And he starts to tear up, and he tries to cover his tears so his bro can't see them. And he's like, "Eumaeus, what? Does this dog go hunting? Is this dog like a table dog? How did this happen?" And Eumaeus said that he's been neglected and the women won't take care of him because everyone thought Odysseus was dead. And so he's just been waiting there for his master to come home. So he's the very picture of a loyal dog who loved his master. And then as soon as Argos sees Odysseus, he wags his tail. He recognizes him. And then he dies. And it's just so sad. And there's been so many academic papers written about this dog. Like the anaresis of Argos, and he is canonically in Western literature the most famous dead dog. And you can't read any poem about a dog or any, Billy Collins' Revenant, you can't read anything about a dog and not think of the dog, Argos. So there's your lesson in the classics today. Oh, now I have to go cry about that dog. Oh my goodness.
Hi, I'm Danica. I listen to Jim's reading of The Revenant, and poetry always sends the mind in so many directions. I was thinking of what haunts us, and being haunted by the feeling that somebody doesn't like us. There's, in me, I know I want to be liked, and I often wonder, is there someone thinking how much they don't like me? Am I rubbing people the wrong way all the time? I was thinking of a poem to read in response, and the first author that I thought of was Anne Shimogalski, because she's written some really interesting and fun and funny and clever poems that have to do with animals and giving animals human characteristics. So I have her book, When Earth Leaps Up, and I was going to read The Winter Cat, but it's really long. It's a wonderful story poem about a cat who lives with a woman, and the woman talks to her and she understands the woman, and the woman understands her, but they're very different and they understand things differently. And the cat leaves for the whole summer season and has a wild life and then goes back into the comfort of the cabin for the winter. So I am going to read instead an untitled, How Strange It Is. How strange it is, I remarked to a cat sitting in a basket chair, that you and I should live together day after day without flying off the handle. It's true that you take advantage of me at every turn. But then how cozy you keep my feet on a winter's night, how sweetly you purr before the fire. The cat flicks its ears, disdainful of my human weakness that leads to these endless strings of spoken words. Presently, I sit down in the opposite chair and doze in the warmth of the sun porch. As I nod off, the cat's unblinking eyes are the last things I see. They grow huge and green, confusing my dreams. Each eye is a whole world. They have become separate planets revolving in the dark of the cat's fur. Or rather, one of them is the moon of the other. It is impossible to guess which. And so I was just thinking about the difference between cats and dogs, and how the dog, well, he is under control, and cats like to have everything under their own control.
Hello, I'm Victoria. I live in Saskatoon. This poem has resulted in being a partial response to the poem The Revenant by Billy Collins. I wrote this poem in honor of my father. Feldman's Mill, circa 1934, for Danny and Emerson. Pockets bulge turnips for the chancy dog. Our raucous swoon, our stolen war cry hours. Two boys slipped the yolk into an egg-yellow perfection of a late afternoon. The lumber mill fence, schoolboys scale like cats. Are you a boy too? What greets you at home? An empty kitchen, cold cans of green peas, your gaunt father's bedridden silence? Do you flee chores or a baby sister? Do you even know this glee? Winkling worm-soft apples off the tree. Pine boards, fresh shavings feather our feet. We balance on short piles, parry and thrust. And then the dog barks. The mill dog rushes to warn, to gnash, roars in exhortation. Go home now, it howls. Go home, it's my place to be lonely here. I am no boy's dog, for me no red ball. Faith never ending asleep on your bed. Your hand on my flank. Ball! Throw me a ball. I am only this dog. I chase and chase. All boys run from me. Our thin bones are pecky birds, bend lean as switches. The millman swears and we scramble on up the swaying stacks. Higher than the fence, above the raging man, we lay out a board. Dance over ages and whirls of empty air. Weighing near to nothing as our board bucks, jumps. We sail the whole yard, Superman, Zorro. We dig in pockets, flying home. Pelt the desperate dog with vegetable stones. Thank you.
Hello, it's Jim again. I've been listening to all the responses to the poem by Billy Collins called The Revenant. But a dead dog that, well, doesn't really like his master comes back to haunt him with that information. Anyway, I thought I'd do a really quick response because this thing's already gone like 20 minutes. First up is Mike. Mike decided to use the Amazing Maurice, which is a story I'd never read by what's his name, Terry Pratchett, and so I immediately went and got it and read it. So I'm not going to tell you any details because it's well worth the read. But he decided to focus on anthropomorphism, I guess accusing somewhat Billy Collins of giving the dog sort of anthropomorphic or human qualities. I don't think he was accusing him of anything really. But he also brings up cats, which are, cats and dogs, as being the sort of most common domesticated pet or animal amongst human beings. Interesting. The relationship with dogs is much older than the one with cats that human beings share. And I'm not talking about domesticated animals like cows or sheep or so on. They were usually kept for food and so on. But dogs, 15,000 or so years ago, human beings started using them as working dogs, hunting dogs, protection perhaps, and so on. And they created this long-lasting relationship. I think cats is more like 1,000 years. And they were really never used for anything except, well, decoration. Much how dogs have become in the last, 50, 60 years. And they're essentially different. Cats and dogs are not herd animals. They're not pack animals like dogs are. So they don't, they're singular and they don't attach themselves in the same way to human beings as perhaps dogs do. Dogs create a pack even if they live all by themselves with a bunch of human beings. There's an alpha dog, etc. Or as Billy Collins might put it, it's a slave-master kind of relationship. I don't think you could ever accuse a cat of being a slave. Anyway, enjoyed that story. Next up was the incredibly impassioned plea for the most famous dead dog from Megan. I really enjoyed that a lot. Frankly, when she said, the most famous dead dog, I immediately thought of Old Yeller. Certainly, I don't know if there's any academic defense for that, except that, well, I think Old Yeller, the book, won the Newbery Award back in the day, I think in the 50s. But really, I admit that I'm talking about the Disney version of Old Yeller. It's a tear-jerking movie. Argos, yeah. I don't know. I'm not very academic, that's for sure, but I'm familiar with the dog Argos, but just familiar, certainly not in a famous sense. But I remember reading a story that featured that portion of the Odyssey and thinking, there's something wrong about that whole dog thing. The dog was 20 plus years old. And it survives just to be, I believe Odysseus kind of pretended he didn't know the dog. Is that correct? I think so. And the suggestion is that's why the dog wagged its tail. So Odysseus, after 20 odd years, and then died of a broken heart, perhaps. But Billy Collins might say that the dog waited all those years. Might have been very loyal to begin with, but then when everybody treated him like crap, he started thinking, why didn't he take me with him? I'm a good dog. I could have been a ratter on the ship, and I could have been adapted to war. I'm pretty big and vicious. I could have been by his side all those years. But no, He leaves me behind with these people who don't really care. So I'm staying alive until I can actually see him and make him feel even worse than he probably already feels for being gone. But it's taken an awful long time. But there he is. Ha! See? Wagging my tail. I can see you. I'm going to try to let all those other people know who you are because I know you're trying to hide from them. Wag, 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 wag. Oh, they don't pay any attention to me. But you see what you've done to me? Do you see what you've done? And then RBC died. Who knows? Who knows what went through that poor creature's head? I've always thought Homer kind of used that dog as a kind of literary device, you know. Anyway, sorry, Megan, but I really enjoyed your impassioned plea. I even had to look up the word anuresis. That was good. By the way, for the rest of you goofballs out there that are like me, I had to look up that word anuresis. You said there was an academic paper called The Anuresis of Argos. And anuresis means you can't pee. So if you're anuretic, I guess, you're a person who can't pee, or in this case, a dog, I guess. Anyway, there you go. There's your academic lesson for today. And then we were back with cats with Danica. And she chose that poem by Anne Simogulski, I believe. It was a lovely poem about the sort of independence of cats, back to that whole notion of what's the difference between cats and dogs. And she quite eloquently puts it at the end. The dogs appear to like to be under control, whereas cats like to be in control. And then finally, there's my neighbors, whom I mentioned right at the beginning of all this. My neighbor's contribution, a poem that she actually wrote, and it was her, you saw it, her response to The Revenant. And it was mostly a poem about her father when he was young, and a friend of his, and the things that young boys get up to, and young girls for that matter, and let's say young people, just to keep me safe. Anyway, that poor dog, she has tremendous sympathy for him. I'm assuming it's a him. The dog, the contrast between the boys, momentary perhaps, but still the great deal of freedom that they enjoyed, and his lack of freedom. That poor dog threw me the ball. No wonder I am the way I am, vicious and uncaring. Why would I be otherwise? I should be out running in the fields. Yeah. The whole notion of having a pet. I must admit it's something that disturbs me. You take on this tremendous responsibility. And so many people don't meet the standards. I see it on my own street. But the whole notion of having, I don't know, a big dog in the middle of the city, who has time to take that dog for the run that it needs every day? I mean, I think there's places, maybe a farm or something for a dog and so on. Cats are a little different. That might be an okay pet. I don't know. But still, there's a lot of responsibility involved. It's just kind of an uneasy relationship we have. I wonder what PETA says about pets. I guess they might say, well, at least we're not eating them. Anyway, that's all I have to say about all that. Thanks everybody for sending out some fabulous things. I enjoyed each and every one of them. And that's that. I hope you, the watcher, if you're watching this, enjoyed all of this as well. And feel free to comment. Send us comments on your notions about cats, dogs, and pets, and whatever else that you thought of as you listened to me and my colleagues talk back and forth. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.